Welcome to the Synergetic Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Bieber, and our mission is simple: to help young professionals maximize their influence and impact. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to the Synergetic Culture. My name is Adam Bieber. We're so glad that you're tuning in for another episode. I'm very excited because this is a two-part episode with our guest, Ben Ortlip, and what we're going to be doing is setting the stage for a massive announcement that we're going to be making towards the end of the second episode. So I'm very excited. I want you to be excited too. I want to give a quick shout out to the O Agency for allowing us to be in this amazing space once again in this studio recording today. And Ben Ortlip, welcome to Synergetic Culture, man.
Hey, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It's truly an honor to have you. For those of you that don't know who Ben is, one, I'd strongly encourage you to connect with him on LinkedIn and follow his journey. But Ben is the author of the book, Culture is the New Leadership. He's also the founder of the Culture MRI, which we're going to talk about some today. And then he's an amazing husband, a dad of 8 children, and a leadership expert. We have quite a funny story of how we met. Did I miss anything as I introduced you here in your bio?
I'm just waiting for you to get to how we met. That's my favorite part of my identity with you.
So let's tell the story then. It was 20 years ago, 2005. So whenever you're watching this episode, it's being recorded in 2025. But it was 2005. I was volunteering with my family at a nonprofit golf tournament.
Yep.
Had no idea. What's that?
Fundraiser.
A fundraiser, yep. Had no idea what the job was going to be for me going into the day.
I was volunteering too.
Yes, and what were you volunteering for?
I was volunteering to produce a real-time video for the company for the fundraising.
For the fundraiser, yeah. So the idea was like everybody goes out and they golf, they come in, do the silent auction. By the time all the golfers come in, you already had like a highlight promo video produced. So we show up really early. I get handed the keys to a golf cart and say, "That's your golf cart." And I'm like 13 years old at the time. Like, you just give me the keys to some wheels. This is awesome. And they said, "You're going to drive the videographer around." And I was like, "Cool." And so that's how we met. I was introduced to you 20 years ago.
We hung out all day.
We laughed a ton.
It was great.
I'll never forget. There was this moment where we were trying to, I think, cut between the links, and you were like, "Just jump the curb right there and we'll cut over that fairway." And I was like,
"Can you do that?"
I don't know how, are we allowed to do, I don't know how to do that. And you just like moved your foot over and grabbed the wheel and started to turn us and showed me how to, like, one wheel at a time, hop that curb in a golf cart. Anyways.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 13.
13, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I was loaded up with the camera and the gear and everything. I was like, all right, a 13-year-old's going to drive this around. This will be fun.
It's so cool. And then fast forward 19 years because we reconnected a year ago.
Yeah.
I was scrolling on LinkedIn and I happened to see the cover of your book actually caught my eye. Culture is the New Leadership. And I was like, culture's my thing. What is this? Yeah. It's a new resource. I need to figure this out. And I read your name and I was like, this can't be the same Ben Ortlip. Yeah. And then I clicked on your picture and I was like, holy smokes, it's the same Ben Ortlip.
Yeah, and the golf tournament was the beginning, but we actually I met the rest of your family around that time. There were a couple of other, can't remember
events.
Where. Yeah, but we crossed paths a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, we really connected. It wasn't just that one day.
Yeah,
it was,
I think the next year I ended up driving for you again.
Okay.
But then also, other fundraising events, same kind of community and people that we were
meeting your
hanging around.
Parents and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, It was there was a meeting of the minds there.
Sure. That's cool.
Yeah. So when you saw my book and everything, it makes sense that, it wouldn't be just like, oh yeah, I think I remember that. And it was like, we had a connection and this was new in that.
For sure. And I mean, I probably talked about just that experience for years.
Yeah.
And so I bought the book, took a picture of it, and then DM'd you a picture of the book and me and said, "I don't know if you remember me. This was a while ago."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Dude, of course I remember you.
That's
you're
like,
all grown up." Yeah.
What kind of question is that?
Oh, man. Super cool. And so over the last year, I've come to really admire the work that you've been doing. I did not realize that over the last 10 to 15 years, you've been really invested in helping companies transform their culture. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. As I mentioned, it's going to be a 2-part episode. So I want to set the groundwork for why culture in organizations is important. And so would you mind just talking a little bit about like the overview, like how did we get here? Like what was the evolution of business?
To answer that question, I'd like to just talk a little bit about where we are today.
Sure. Yeah.
And the kinds of things that, people are facing. This is a really interesting time in history.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anybody has really understood. Most people don't recognize that, this is something just changed in the world, and this is how we got like this. Most people get up every day and they're like, oh, I didn't know this was going to be an issue or whatever. But there's a systemic sort of dynamic going on, and I'd like to just touch on that for a second. Please. Because, if you look out at the workforce, there's a lot of problems that are happening. And you could look at that and say, oh, well, this is just what work is. It's solving this kind of problem. But if you compare it to the way things were 20 years ago or 50 years ago, it's very different from the kinds of things. And so we're actually not very good at solving those problems. And in fact, a lot of what we're trying to do to solve some of today's problems are the tools and processes that would have been used 20 or 30 years ago. And they're just not really the same thing at all. So we need a new mindset. Companies are running into situations where, they have underperforming things. Well, okay, haven't we always had underperforming? No, not really the same thing here. Yeah. There's a lot of, at the core of it, you've either got people that just aren't executing on the strategy or on the plan. You've got little hiccups. And one of the biggest things that seems to be going on today is there's all of these sort of ditches that keep, either the whole economy will just sort of take a hit, like out of the blue,
Sure.
Right now you've got these tariff wars going on. Yeah. And just when the economy looked like we were going to, have a season of growth, we have this sort of global scenario.
Disruption. Yeah.
5 years ago it was COVID.
Yep.
And it looked like things were going to move in a good direction, and then everybody just sort of locked down, and a lot of, so there's always we didn't used to have these sort of global issues come up. So there's unpredictable change.
Sure.
But for the people who are trying to manage every day, just finding the staff to do the job, things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I would point out is, let's figure out what's going on from a macro level first. And how is this different from whatever happened in the past?
Sure.
Because I think we need to bring a different set of tools and probably a different mindset to solve this. And this is why I titled the book, Culture is the New Leadership. Because for the last probably 50 years, there's been this huge emphasis on leadership. And, if you just wake up today in the middle of your career, you might actually believe that, well, of course, leadership is the thing to focus on. It always has been, but it hasn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go back just real quick to the Industrial Revolution. Okay. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we were actually an agrarian society. So no big businesses at all. In fact, small organizations were the norm. You didn't have these like multinational companies. There were a few large banks and government entities that were massive, but for the most part, more than 50% of the workforce was just involved in raising food,
Sure.
agricultural related business. And so what's interesting about that is that if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the vast majority of workers back then were at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. So just break they were surviving. You break it down into three categories, sort of survival at the bottom, maybe success in the middle, and then significance at the top, what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. So if you just mapped like a heat map of the workforce, they were all at the bottom, just trying to survive. And this is why people would get on a boat and change the country where they, leave the mother homeland and go to, think about what they risked in order to try to survive, you know. So America, was this land of plenty, and that was the driving sort of energy. And so the way this played out is companies were able to engage workers and make them functional by offering sort of an operating system in their so and basically it was an authority-based operating system.
Sure.
It was like, hey, there's a lot of people that want to do this job and it's brutal, and we're going to put you in a factory, and you're going to have to do exactly what we tell you, and you're not going to like it. Picture all these people that, were get on a coal mine elevator and just cram in there, and they're covered with soot. But they were like competing at the gates of the factory to be able to get in and have that job, because that's all they had to do to survive. It was, if you just show up here and do what we tell you to do, then we'll give you enough money to eat. So they would do that. And it was very authoritarian. About 50 years goes by, and, they achieve this sort of survival. And just like Maslow would have told us, that after you have a need met, you don't stop needing. It's just your needs evolve. And so the next thing that showed up for them was sort of a desire not to just survive, but to succeed.
Sure.
To be successful.
Is this where the idea of the American dream comes from? This like,
that's right.
I don't just need to show up here and survive and just get my basic needs met and keep power on and food on the table. No, I want the white picket fence. I want to own the home. I want all of that. This is where that came from. Yeah.
So when I was growing up, there were a lot of TV shows that sort of, were just iconically represented that, like these people, like you said, the white picket fence, and the dad was just, sort of wearing the hat and walking with the briefcase and all this. So there was sort of a socioeconomic status that went with, in addition to surviving, they were now successful. They started cars marketed to being status symbols of success. And so, white picket fences and all that was just, you started to see more than just survival, but a sense of identity and establishment and everything. So again, back to our Maslow's hierarchy, that's a transition. And nobody said, okay, now we're leaving the survival era and we're going into the success era. But that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
And I point out the fact that nobody noticed it, because the same thing happened around 1980 and 90, and maybe into 2000 a little bit. We shifted again because success alone wasn't motivating for people. That was sort of like, a given. It was like a commodity that you could, anybody can go to college if they're just willing to put in the work. Anybody can move up in a company if you're just willing to put in the work and build your tenure and everything else. And so back to Maslow, what happens when our need for success is kind of already a given? It's an assumed.
Yeah.
We start to desire something else. And this is when we shifted. Again, we shifted from success to something called significance.
Yeah.
Here's what's important about that. If you look at today's workforce, for the first time in the history, in recorded history, in any civilization that we know of, this is the first time in history that the workforce has reached what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. And so, again, I know I'm talking a lot about the sort of psychology of work.
Yeah. This is great, though.
But this is really you have to understand, this is what's behind the things that are creating problems, challenges, and really limiting our aspirations in business today. If you can understand sort of the hidden psychometrics that are behind the scenes, then you can unlock tremendous potential in the everyday business. In fact, the companies that are thriving the most, the leaders that are thriving the most, either instinctually, execute in ways that meet the needs of people for not only success but significance, or they've learned it somehow, or they've happened upon it. If you analyze the successful companies, the ones that are most sought after, the best places to work and all that, they're the ones who either inadvertently or by design are hitting on these issues that feed into the needs of the workforce successfully. So, but who knows what those are, right? That's the next question. How do we know what it is?
Yeah.
And so as the culture industry began to take shape, people were just kind of sticking a finger in the air and guessing, and they knew it was something to do with keeping people happy. And so, this is where, ping pong tables started to replace conference rooms and things like that.
Friday pizza parties.
Yeah. So a lot of real just rudimentary plans to create happiness in the workforce. And
if we just put a kegerator in the corner, then maybe people will feel better about coming to the office.
Make it fun.
Yeah.
And those are effective, but they are kind of like, selling elixir to people just so that they can have a minute of something that feels better than what they were feeling.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in here. I want to thank our sponsors, the O Agency and Wingman Payments, for supporting this podcast and believing in what we're doing here. So I'm curious. We've got this survival, success, significance. Let's talk a little bit about the perspective of the worker in those three areas. So in the survival era, you mentioned a little bit, but it really was like hierarchy, control, and authority, and the perspective of that younger worker or the worker that didn't have a leadership position of some kind. Right. What was their world like? Let's just dive into that a little bit more, and we'll build here. But I just want to capture, because I think I try to put myself in other people's shoes, and I think for our audience, primarily younger professionals, if we were to put ourselves in their shoes, what would it feel like for us going to work every day? If we were in that position. Yeah.
So, this is where survival may be a little bit of a harsh word depending on how you perceive it, but
sure.
So it's not necessarily it's not a desperation survival, but it's more like, hey, I'll do anything to get my foot in the door, to establish some ground, to position myself for a career and things like that.
Yeah.
And so if you're motivated by this, and strangely fewer and fewer people are at this point in history, but you're like, hey, I'm a yes man. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm a hustler. Whatever you tell me to do, just tell me what wall to run through.
Yeah.
And I'll do it. And I'll probably wake up before the alarm clock because I'm excited. And the reason you're doing that is because, food, shelter, clothing, establishment of a career and the potential for advancement and everything else waits behind that. And, life teaches us that if we just apply ourselves, then all kinds of opportunities are waiting behind that. So that's what we mean when we talk about survival.
Yeah.
And, so a lot of people begin their careers kind of thinking, and it's not survival mode, it's survival motivation.
Got it.
So that's where I would just distinguish a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not about desperation, although, you may come to a point later in your career and you feel like you're in survival mode. And what's important to notice about that, if you're a leader, is that when your people are in the survival motivation or mode, that they'll respond more and more to the authoritarian sort of operating system of the company.
Sure.
So, and this can be confusing for people because, later on that's not going to work. And so we have a lot of places where leaders are trying to, lead by authority and just bark orders, and, they have a low sort of empathy.
Yep.
And that motivation or that leadership style still should work in some places where people are in the survival thing and they're willing to run through whatever wall you tell them. But if you accidentally bring that operating system to a little more of a success-oriented workforce, it's going to backfire on you.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so you have to kind of understand where people are in their journey,
Sure.
where the organization is in terms of its, trajectory and what the culture's made up of.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the whole point of our book and everything else is do we understand where we are in this sort of journey, and the historical context, and the organizational progression and all this stuff. There's this whole, it's less studied than some of the other disciplines that run companies. It's kind of a brand new thing.
There's this, as I'm hearing you talk about this, as the eras have transformed, there are always going to be people that lag behind a little bit. And I think you were kind in the way you said there might be still an application for an authoritarian hierarchy structure, because there probably is. But as I'm thinking it through, I've actually experienced the gap of someone who's stuck in the success era when we're truly living in the culture era now, and working with people that desire significance, that desire a higher satisfaction and emotional connection to what they do.
Yeah.
And the sad part is watching that play out, where there's a leader that goes, you get a good salary, just shut up and do the job. And it's like, you're right. Like you are hitting the survival and success metrics, but you're totally destroying this opportunity for someone to step into a higher significance and feeling that they get from the place that they work. And I think, to me, it's sad when I see that play out, because it's a missed opportunity. It hurts the dynamics of that team and that organization. It makes things feel toxic at times, which I don't, that word can kind of get abused and used too much, but I think it can create a toxic structure. And then also, I've never seen the value in ruling by fear and authority first.
Right.
And so as we've evolved, we're now in this relationship-driven, emotional connection type significance space. And as, again, going back to majority of our listeners are going to be young professionals, what is it that we're looking for? What is it that audience is looking for today in the culture era?
It really runs the gamut. And I think this is the whole point is, maybe think of it in terms of there are at least, let's just say in our framework, there's 3 different kind of places where somebody might be. If you're trying to lead people, and even if you're trying to, lead up, as they say, you may be below people in the organizational hierarchy, but you still want to be able to manage up or lead up,
Sure.
and know how to interact with people. And that starts with really knowing kind of their locus of control. What are they interested in? What will they respond to in terms of it? Okay, so here's the first rule of that, is that people are somewhere either kind of in what we call the survival set of motivators, or the success set of motivators, or the significance set of motivators. And, it's true today that there is a large segment of the population whose motivation sort of fits into what we call the survival era, and that operating system And there are certain needs that they have. They need just a basic work environment, a set of systems and processes that are learnable and executable. It's up to the company to create that, that operating system, that context for work. And if you don't do that, then you're going to have trouble meeting the needs of those frontline workers. And they're going to struggle to, they're not going to thrive at achieving the objectives of the business or and therefore their own objectives as workers.
Yeah.
They're going to start punching the snooze button a little bit longer in the morning.
Sure.
It's just the way people respond. That our human nature is that when our needs are met, we tend to thrive, and when they're not met, either through negligence or rebellion, then we start looking for another job somewhere, or we just, even worse, we stay where we are, but we kind of quit on the inside.
Yep.
And of course, we could talk about the consequences of that for the organization in terms of turnover, suppressed productivity, and there's tons of studies about disengagement and the cost of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the principle, is that you need to first understand that you need to see this world that we're talking about.
Yeah.
This world of motivations. It's kind of a set of lenses that you may not be wearing already intuitively. But where are people coming from? Are they sort of in the survival phase? Are they in the success phase?
Yeah.
Are they kind of more in the self-actualization / significance phase?
Yeah. I think what helps in that is that we're no longer, I guess having language and context to better understand the perspective, because that doesn't necessarily, if somebody is managing in that survival mode, motivator space, or even the success motivator space, that doesn't necessarily inherently make them a bad person. So at first, being able to recognize, oh, okay, there's a difference here. I think it's helpful, that realization.
Right. And because it doesn't mean like you're mean and authority, autocratic, brutally. All it means, if you're doing this well, like, for example, I did a bunch of work with Chick-fil-A, and they have a ton of frontline workers. And it's not like they're like old school crack the whip kind of thing, but what they do so well is they create, we in our framework, we identify sort of 7 disciplines, operating disciplines, that, if your workforce has a survival, subset to it, there's sort of 7 disciplines that if you really focus on these, that your workforce is just going to go, oh man, this is great. One of the things that they do so well is they create a system and a process. So if you look at Chick-fil-A, one of the things they've been so good at is creating just a great, assembly line inside the stores. Look at how innovative they've been with the double drive-throughs.
Seriously.
The people walking around with iPads. So those are all things, if you think about it, they're coming from these set of disciplines at the bottom. Create a workplace where everything works. And so that somebody who wants to run through a wall for you will be successful if they just show up and run through the wall. So it's not about whether you're a nice leader or a mean leader. It's about whether you're actually delivering those 7 disciplines that you can, execute in order to have everybody thriving, high productivity, not a lot of lost effort or energy. You hire somebody, they come in, they stay for a long time because they like it there, they're doing well. But that's what it looks like, so we have to get behind the word authority a little bit. And, so I think the reason we use the word authority there is because it's very much, I'm telling you what to do, and you're like, okay, well, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
Yeah.
That's authority too. It doesn't mean like, I'm over you and you're below me.
It's not a power struggle.
It's right.
It's just not a organizational hierarchy.
Yeah. It's just, here's the facts.
Yep.
And that's distinguished from, this sort of, we transition to an operating system we call influence, where there's more of a collaboration between, well, what do you think we should do next? And we're sort of pushing decisions further down into the organization. And that's why the word authority is so key there, because it's very much command and control in a good way. There's a lot of clarity about what everybody's supposed to do.
Yep.
Whereas later on, when you want to be part of the success equation, we graduate to sort of, this collaboration mode, what we call influence.
Yep.
And instead of just, commanding orders to you, I'm going to influence you and help you.
And empower you.
Yeah.
Even.
Coach you.
Yep. Yep.
So
what we're building toward is really where a lot of companies find themselves today, is this need to invest in the culture of their organization.
Right.
People are choosing organizations based on culture, and they're leaving organizations based on culture. And one of the things we talk about on this podcast is this idea that culture is formed either by design or by default. And so the default settings of, an electronic or a vehicle or something like that, they usually aren't sufficient for the long haul. You have to design the exact result that you want.
Right.
But a lot of times, I think as this culture era has evolved, the idea of designing the culture is this figurative, like people they throw stuff up on the wall and they try to see if it sticks. Like we get a ping pong table and a kegerator and then we do happy hours on Tuesdays. Like, does that solve our culture problem?
Yeah.
And what we're building toward is what we're going to talk about in our next episode, which is how to measure and address and transform culture in a very systematic way.
You can do that?
We can do that. And really it's what is the foundation for what we're launching at the Synergetic Culture, which is called the Culture by Design Framework. Beautiful. So I'm super excited to jump back into this conversation in a little bit. But before we wrap up, any thoughts for our listeners today, just as we've set the table for where have we come from, where are we headed, what's to come?
Yeah, I think the reason that we spend this whole episode just kind of on the context for this, and I think what we're probably leaving people with a lot of questions right now. So apologize for leaving you with a cliffhanger, but it's so important that the first thing you do is really examine the context of where we are beyond your own career, but into the business landscape, and why and so we're trying to raise the awareness that, things have changed. Something so dramatic has changed, and we're not doing a very good job of noticing it.
Sure.
And so if you as a leader can start with an understanding of what exactly has been going on, what's the sort of negative inertia that exists in the workplace that's causing so many people to make the wrong kinds of moves and to bring the wrong style of leadership to different situations, you're going to be so much more instinctive about what to do the right way. So again, we've had sort of, the backstory is that we had the whole era of, survival and authority. And then we transitioned into success and influence, if you will. The sort of social contract or the operating system for the organization that goes with each one. When your workforce wants to survive, you give them sort of a social contract around authority. When they're in the success, you start to, negotiate, collaborate, and influence. And so, but here's the transition where we are today, and that is we've actually reached what Maslow called self-actualization. First time it's ever happened in the world, which is one of the big reasons that, we're sort of scratching our heads around it. But so what do you do when this sort of, higher level of needs, what's the social contract that you should bring to that? And so that's what we'll talk about in the next episode.
I'm excited, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. As we wrap up this episode, I want to say thank you to the O Agency and also Wingman Payments for sponsoring this episode. We're super excited to be back here in just a little bit. I'm not going to wait to upload the next episode, so you'll be able to watch it very soon. Ben, thank you, and excited to continue this conversation shortly.
Great.